Hi, Robert. It's great to meet again, and it's fantastic that we are keeping the discipline. In the last episode, we said we'll talk about the imposter syndrome, and also we said we'll talk about strategy, and particularly the length of the strategies that an organization commit itself to. I think we've been having some side talks, you and I, about that, and we thought the half an hour or so that we keep for this for the length of our conversation will not give justice to cover both of them. So today we'll focus maybe on the imposter syndrome, and probably the next episode or the episode after that we talk about strategy, because I think it's your area, and I'm very interested in hearing your views. And it is actually something that many people are grappling with. Should we do a 5-year, 3-year, 1 year, 10-year, whatever? So if we go back to the imposter syndrome, which is that internal or private insecurity or uncertainty that is happening while the face of leadership needs to be slightly different. And we talked about the improvisation versus the practice. And actually, I was having my thoughts about imposter syndrome, and maybe it's not a bug, it's not a quirk of psychology, but a feature of leadership. Because when we compare management to leadership, management is a discipline, is a practice that we have processes and methods and frameworks for, and we could relatively easily develop people to become managers. But leadership is really defined when the map runs out, when the terrain changes, and that is the moment where the uncertainty, both internal and external, is at its highest. That is the moment of leadership. And that's the bit that I wanted to start our conversation with. What is your reflection on that, and what are your thoughts?
So starting is such an important thing, and this is a good start to today's conversation. I'm going to start by noticing that when we said we would talk about strategy, I closed our last conversation by saying that evoked imposter syndrome in me. So I'm delighted that it's been pushed back by at least one episode. I'm going to lobby for a longer delay so I can read up about strategy. Second thing, the relationship between certainty and uncertainty, and that distinction you drew between leadership and management, I think that's a really useful thing. The idea that in management, one way of distinguishing is to think of management as contexts where it's all quite familiar and we've done this before, and there is a way of doing things that is seen as acceptable or good or efficient, and therefore it's just about managing that. Whereas leadership is, I think you used the phrase, when the map runs out. So when the circumstances have never occurred before, and in our working lifetime, relatively recently, COVID was a really good example of that. Nobody had ever figured out how to all be remote working all at the same time. And so that is a context where you need some leadership. And perfectly understandably, for the individual leader in those circumstances, people are looking to you for confidence and certainty and reassurance. And by definition, it's not available to you because nobody's ever done this before. And that connects to a thing from our last conversation about the relationship between modesty and immodesty and false modesty, I think, because in my experience, really powerful leaders are able to display a level of humble uncertainty without necessarily undermining the confidence of the group that they're with. If you contrast two different examples, in example A, a leader who says, "Oh my goodness, I have no idea how to do this. This is a complete disaster. We're all doomed. This has gone horribly wrong. Why did this happen to me?" That is clearly not someone that's going to inspire confidence. But somebody who honestly and authentically says, "Do you know, I'm struggling a bit here," and it's saying that to maybe an inner circle of closer colleagues is actually really a powerful convening thing. And I wondered if you could think of any examples from your time of living in one of those two spaces.
Well, I just so happen to remember exactly the example, Robert. Working for Harriet Watt has been one of my proudest sort of professional achievements. It's a great university, great community. And, when I first were made the provost in Malaysia, that was my first experience as a chief executive. As in that sort of campus, I am the person with whom the buck stops, sort of. And that was an amazing responsibility, amazing opportunity. But I noticed that I started to have a challenge. I've built my entire career based on me delivering personally certain things. I delivered the first massive open online course in Malaysia and one of the first in Asia. I've started project-based learning, and I brought a number of global initiatives to my previous institutions, and they were the first in Malaysia. So there are many things that you could see my name directly on them. And I drew a sense of achievement, a sense of purpose, identity, and even certainty from all of that. And as a provost and working in a multi-campus, multi-country university, most of the work that needs to happen needs to be done by other people. And I felt for a while entirely insecure. I felt that I wasn't adding any value. There are other people who are doing the work, and I'm suddenly just put in charge of all of that, but it's other people who are doing the work. So in one of the meetings with my senior leadership team, the deputy provost, the registrar, the chief of finance, I actually told them, I want to tell you that I have never felt so insecure in my entire life, and I'm questioning my existence, and I don't feel that I'm adding enough value to justify the salary that I'm drawing. And it just so happened that the team actually was able to really work with me and support me and point to areas where I was able to add value and do things and so on. And now on, sometimes this happened probably 10 years ago or so. But from time to time, I reflect on it, and I'm until now not very sure whether that was the right thing or the wrong thing. I thought I took such a huge risk, not only personally, but even at the institution level. Just imagine if these people, thought what's going on here? We thought they brought us an experienced leader to take us to the next level and lead the next stage in the development of the institution. But this guy knows nothing, and probably we know better than him. And if they had that idea, would that been good or bad? I'm not sure. So I'm actually now in sort of in two minds. If someone is having a similar experience, whether I were to advise them to be as open as they were with their team or not. And I know it depends on how much you know the team and all of that, but actually it's really a moment of risk. Of course, it could go well, and people see you as humble and authentic, and that was real modesty. I was literally, I'm there. There's no no walls and no makeup or cosmetics. I'm telling you as I feel it. But at the same time, people, I feel also they yearn to having that leader that somehow inspire that confidence. So I think that will remain a moment of uncertainty for me actually until now. As I said, I'm not sure I recommend this to others or to even the people who are listening to us. But it worked so well back then because, again, the people were highly experienced. They were great people individually on the human level, but they were great leaders in their own right. So I don't know whether, how are you, Robert? Did you have a similar moment, or even do you have do you have a reflection for me to put me at
So
peace? Because honestly, I'm not at peace with that moment until now.
so there are two reflections I would share back. One is about layers, and so you made that you made yourself vulnerable in that conversation, but not with everybody, with the people you talk to most immediately, so your direct reports. And if I was guessing, I would say that's 3 or 4 or 5 people. It's not 300 or 400 or 500 people. And so I could see in the story that you've told a version which works really well, because you say to your closest colleagues authentically, I'm not sure about this. I don't know if I can do this. I think if you did that in an all staff meeting, that would have quite a different consequence, right? So there's something about layers. And then the second reflection I would have is a phrase that I've heard other people say quite often is, of course, leaders require followers.
Mm,
And so the people who might eventually listen to these conversations about leadership and the nature of leadership might be listening because they aspire eventually to be in a leadership position themselves.
mm,
And the transition from being in a management position, where earlier in this conversation we were saying you are enacting processes that work quite well, to a leadership position where you have to forge a new path and create a new map. That transition, everybody who makes that transition, by and large, has already had experience of being led. So rather than answering your question directly, I would say, how would you have felt to be on the receiving end of that conversation? So what's
mm,
the audience's reaction from the follower to the leader? And again, I would say it depends on the extent to which it is caricatured or authentic. So if the version of
mm,
that conversation is, oh my goodness, I think we're all doomed. I have no idea how to do this. I think I may have made a catastrophic mistake.
mm,
That's pretty extreme. But the showing of some vulnerability, I think for some followers would be, wow, that's
mm,
honest and human, and I can see the kind of limitations of the person. And in some ways, it has this counterintuitive reinforcement of, yeah, but everybody would have some doubt. You know, there's also a kind of sociopathic thing, which is if you don't display any doubt, that's in itself quite unnerving.
you're right. Actually, this is very, very powerful. I've never thought about it that way, that I put myself at the sort of receiving end. But interestingly, Robert, I have never worked with a leader or being led by a leader who told me about their doubt in that way. I mean, I thought I took things really to an extreme, but I really meant well by that. And probably the question for me, for you to reflect on is, is there, when the map disappears, there's no map for the terrain. Is there at least another map that people would say, think of this, and or put yourself in that position, just to help people deal with these moments of uncertainty? Because we all have seen leaders who double down on, no, 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 we exactly know what's going on, and let's go in this direction, and let's show no hesitation. And these things, first, if the direction is wrong, could be disastrous for the organization. But it also takes its toll on the person, because partly those good people who have to act as if they know exactly what's going to happen, and they don't, and I don't think they could hold this for very long. So what would be the alternative map when the map disappears?
I'm going to say three things, one of which is a story. I know you like stories as much as I do. So the story, which I've heard before, is of an army commander on an exercise with a group of his troops. And let's say, and I can't remember the detail of the story, but let's say that they were in the Pyrenees in Europe. and a snowstorm comes and they're stuck and they get lost and they don't really have enough supplies and people are a bit anxious. And the commander, from his rucksack after a night spent in the snow, produces a map and says, "It's okay, folks, we go this way." And they march off the mountain eventually and they find safety and everybody survives and it has a happy ending. But the story, the twist in the story is the map was not of the Pyrenees, the map was of the Alps. And the thing that the followers needed was, "Thank goodness, he's got a map. We're going to be okay." It doesn't it doesn't matter that it wasn't a map of the situation that they're in. So the appearance of confidence can be, I think, in itself a motivating, reassuring, convening power. And in your comments, you were alluding to the situation where someone doubles down and says, no, it's not this. And so confidence is an illusion which is co-created between the leader and the followers. Now, if you'd been one of those soldiers and you happened to have got up earlier in the morning and seen that it was a map, but not of the mountain range that you were in, you would be sitting there as a follower thinking, he's completely lost the plot. He's mad. He's now telling us to follow a map which is of the wrong place, or he's got it upside down.
Yep.
So there's something about that, isn't there? There's something about the appearance of confidence and the confidence trick, to use a magician's term, about alluding with the audience about the importance of certainty, right? Then the second thing that I would say in relation to the story you were telling is that it depends on how would you react as a follower. So there is something compelling, honest, human, sympathetic about the idea that if someone's telling me I'm not so sure, but I think they're doing the right thing, I think I see them adding value, then you can say that, and that becomes a bonding process between the follower and the leader, where you get some reassurance. I often think, this is the third thing I wanted to say, that the most difficult thing in my experience of leadership roles is to understand how you are perceived by the people that you're working with. And so I've had more than one instance of people saying, so for example, when I've left organizations, I've more than once had people say, "I learned so much from working with you." And I find myself really desperate to say, "What did you learn?" I wasn't conscious I was teaching you, so what did you learn? And I now actively ask people that when I'm in, changing from one job to another, because I am genuinely interested. And I'm also aware, as I've moved into some leadership positions, the extent to which you have a degree of power and consequence to your actions, which I don't always fully appreciate. What do I mean by that? I mean, for example, when you say, "Well, I think we should turn left," and you go away at the end of the day and you go off to do other things and you come back a few days later and you realize the whole organization has turned left, and not only turned left, but moved several miles left. And what I was actually saying was, I think we could turn left. I'm thinking about it. I haven't decided yet. But what was heard was, I think we should turn left. And actually, perversely, I found, working in a variety of universities, the more efficient, organized, optimized, proficient the management of the organization, the higher the consequences of these decisions where you think maybe we should turn left. And I'll be really honest, I won't name which universities, but as I transitioned from one university which was not that well organized and run to one which was incredibly well organized and run, I really noticed that I had to be careful with what I said, because I might say, well, maybe we should stop this degree or start that degree or invest in this or change that. And I'd come back 2 days later and say, oh, we've changed that. What else do you want us to do? And I was used to working in an organization where that might take a year or two to think about.
Right. This is very, very deep, Robert, and it's get me thinking. Now, if I go back and reflect on my question about the map, when the map runs out, when the map of the train runs out, I personally felt, or I continuously feel, that when we have a real sense of purpose, that becomes a helpful thing. And if the purpose is clear, even if the map is not non-existent, then at least a direction, whether it's right or left, shows itself in one way or another. And the other thing that I usually now use with my colleagues when we are supposed to, make a decision and it's not very clear what should the decision be, I actually ask them and ask myself, in 2 or 3 years from today, when the pressure of the moment is not upon us, which decision you think will be more proud of? And often this really clarifies things. Sometimes you are under pressure to cut costs or do things faster, and the consequence could be an impact on people. And in the moment, maybe the way to cut costs could be X or Y or Z. But the moment you say, actually, would I be proud of this decision 2 3 years when I'm not even in the position or with that organization? And things become clear. And I think the probably the third thing I would say, every organization now has a vision, has a mission, has sets of values. And often these are used, celebrated, dealt with when there is certainty, when things are, going on correctly and right, and the revenue is coming and there's no financial or regulatory or other pressures. But sometimes when the pressure comes in, when the vision and the mission and the values are needed the most, this would be the moment that sometimes leaders ignore these items, almost being treated as luxuries. And I think this is probably the map. It may sound like, yeah, right, this is what everybody says, but actually when things are difficult, people who made decisions that are principles, values based, are the ones that we will remember. And we remembered, we remember Martin Luther King and other people who actually did very difficult things and were able to lead so many people because they really they were able to stick to their principles, to their purpose, and to their values. So probably a bit of reflection on that, because you are a scholar of organizations and how they organize themselves, and also vision, mission, strategies, and so on.
So not for the first time in our conversations, I'm going to start my answer with a quote that I like. So quote that I like from a university I used to work at, Northumbria University, their outgoing chair of the governing body. He had a quote which I would translate to being about values, but he was talking about the relationship between the governing body, the non-executive body, and the executive team. And he said the relationship between the governing body and the university executive is like a tea bag. You only discover how strong it is when you put it in hot water.
Right. Yeah, very
And I
true.
would say the same thing is true if you translate that to organizational values. Very few organizations have values which are anything other than barely similar to each other.
Yes.
So they mostly will say, we try to behave authentically, we tell the truth, we respect each other, we're inclusive, Those things are easy to say, as you say, when the circumstances are benign and the map is clear.
Mm.
And they're much less easy to do when the consequences are high, the degree of jeopardy is high, and the level of known information is low. And so I would say that the challenge around leadership is a bit like the relation. You've used this idea of maps in this conversation, and you and I are old enough to remember when maps came folded up neatly, and you had to unfold them and read them. And of course, many of the people who might listen to this will have grown up in a context where maps are not like that. Really, that's very old-fashioned. They'd be more like Google Maps or And the thing about digital maps is that you can apply different filters. You can decide, do you want to see the road network? Do you want to see the kind of 3D version with buildings? You know, when you think about sat nav, and the more sophisticated that it gets, the more it can drop you into the centre of KL, which is near where you live. And actually, you can see the hotel you're supposed to turn left at, and you can see the traffic light you're supposed to be coming to. And I think maps are multi-layered things in this conversation. There is a map which is to do with the business of the business, whether that is a university or a manufacturing company. Or so what are our competitors doing? What does the product look like? What's our market share? What price point? What do consumers want? That's a business layer in the map. There's a different filter you can put on and so show me the values version of the map. And that would be your question of 5 years from now, which version of this decision would I be proudest of?
Mm.
And so maybe the phrase that you opened this conversation with, which was that leadership happens when the map runs out, is both useful, but it's not that digital and contemporary. Because the
Mm.
idea is the map is relatively infinite. The thing is about which map are you looking at?
Mm.
And unlike my story, where the army commander convinced his colleagues that they would be safe to follow him because he had a map, even though it was a map of a different mountain range. Actually, the question isn't about that. It's about which version of the map am I looking at. So it's the same mountain range, but I'm looking at the values perspective versus the topographic perspective versus the business perspective. And so there's stuff to do with organizational culture and values, and there's stuff to do with the business of the organization. And because organizations are populated by people, all of that organizational stuff is also filtered through the thing I said earlier, which is what is the individual judgment being made from a follower listening to a leader who's trying to tell them to stop doing something or to start doing something different or to be brave enough to continue doing something when it doesn't look like it's working. And they're making an evaluation through a whole range of different layers of their map. One of which is this good for the organization we both currently work for? Another of which is this good for me? Is this
Mm.
going to be career limiting if I decide to follow this guy who clearly has no idea what he's doing and it turns out to be a big mistake? They're making a kind of investment decision as well as an emotional decision about what they like and don't like about that behavior.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. I think the notion of the digital maps, and also I will carry as a lesson the the idea of putting myself in the position of the people who are to experience that authentic sharing if I were to give it. And I think that's very powerful. Robert, we are reaching the end of this, and I really wanted us to reflect on the uncertainty that our students are facing. We both work with young people who are just starting their degrees, or some of them are about to go to the job market at a time where there's so much change and uncertainty. And many a times people come to us and say, what degree should I do? Or what degree should my daughter, son do so that they are guaranteed a fulfilling and a relatively comfortable life? And of course, there is a sort of a marketing answer. Well, if you do AI or digital or whatever, you'll be good. Or there is the other answer, which is nobody knows actually, and the best thing is to work on yourself. So, what are your reflections on how to answer this question? But also, generally speaking, how do we prepare our young people, whether they are our students or our own children, if they choose to listen to us, to that to that highly uncertain future?
The idea that they would listen to us is in itself charming.
Well, maybe they will listen to what we are saying, but maybe in 10, 20 years from today.
Yeah, maybe. Um, so what I'm most struck by is the assumptions that I'm bringing to this conversation. So I'm assuming that you and I, as elder statesmen, as tribal elders, we've got lots of experience, so we should know stuff, right? And these poor children who are facing these dilemmas for the first time, they won't know stuff, and they should learn from our experience. But in actual fact, the dilemma that you've just presented, which is what should I study in order to have a career given how fast the world is changing, is exactly the same kind of uncertainty. Well, no one would know. And you could apply exactly the kinds of discipline that we've rehearsed in this conversation and say, well, 5 years from now, when you've graduated, which decision would you be most proud of? Is it that you chose to go after AI and digital technologies because you thought by doing that, I'll be guaranteed a job and there's a chance in 5 years' time I'll be a billionaire? Or is it that I've gone on to study ancient philosophy because, well, it's the thing I'm genuinely interested in? You started in an earlier episode of these conversations saying, as a school child, you were trying to read the theory of relativity. Would you go off and read about relativity? Because, well, it's the thing I'm genuinely passionate about, and I'll be led by my nose. In 5 years' time, I may or may not have a job, but I'll know stuff about something I was really interested in. And there is no way of answering that question except to say, you probably have to answer that question. And then I'm going to connect this back to another thing I said in another earlier episode of this conversation. And then it will turn out experience is a thing you get just after you needed it.
That's right.
And you'll either discover that I went to university, did an AI degree, only to discover just as I graduated that AI was so much better that it no longer needed humans. And so there wasn't even any jobs in AI. Or I'll discover that the opposite was true. I did a degree in the theory of relativity, only to discover that AI is so amazingly smart that nobody needs to learn that stuff anymore. And I should have been doing AI, and I'm now broke. And the person that I went to school with who did the AI degree is now a billionaire, and I can't afford to even go and visit him. There's no way of knowing. So you
Yeah,
have to be led by your own values, and 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 even are kind of conscious of the kind of status involved in the framing of that these young people who need guidance, these young people are going through the same transition of not knowing to knowing, and having to go from the experience of a path of, in my experience, across multiple different national settings, which we've spoken about, a relatively structured schooling system in the early years to a place where you gradually have to build your own curriculum and decide what you want to study and what you want to do. And if there's anything about the transition from being young to not being so young, it's the transition from being on a path that others have carved for you to being on a path where the map is beginning to run out or the digital layers in the map become more interesting. And you have to make choices.
Fantastic. So I think that that's a really very nice way to circling back to where we started. And I really like the way you framed it's actually the same thing, whether it's happening when you are taking a new job at a level that you've never played at, or you are a student who are moving from high school to university at a highly uncertain time. Think of what you will be proud of. You ask yourself that question. Maybe uh, if someone else were to ask you that question, what would you answer them if you were to put yourself in that empathy kind of exercise that we talked about, and also look at these multiple layers of the digital map to see whether you are operating at the right level or the right layer of that map for you to answer this question, and accept that after all of that you may actually make the wrong decision. And that would be an experience that happened after you've needed it.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the final thing that I would say is that all of which I think is somehow wrapped up for me with this dynamic between doing more of the thing you already know how to do and the other version of that, which is doing something different, which could become something completely new, or it could be combining things you already know how to do, but in a different recipe. And at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about that relationship between rehearsing things you're already competent at versus learning to do new things. And for me, and it may be only for me, but I'm at my happiest when there is a blend of those two things. I don't like being completely out of my depth, but I also don't like just doing the same thing again and again and again.
And I think that actually is very encouraging and liberating, because it means, as we defined leadership as in its purest form, as happening at the improvising when the map runs out or the need to move to a new layer of the map exists, is actually the thing that people need to develop now, because the bit that is at the practice level, the thing that is secured and well known, is really becoming, not that available in the world, and also maybe it's not that interesting as well. So it
Yeah.
is an exciting chapter for everyone.
So I'm going to suggest a transition to our next conversation, and I'm going to regret doing this, but the transition could be if, what happens when you think about strategies, is a thing I've studied a lot. What if you think of strategies as maps?
I really like that. Yeah, I really like that. I think that's very powerful, because sometimes, I personally, in my current university, have been through two strategies, and the framing, the story of the strategy, is actually very powerful. So the last strategy, we framed it as a house, and that framed the way we talked about it. For the new strategy that we are developing now, we haven't really firmed up the visual uh, representation of it. And I think the map and the layers is quite an interesting one. But let's keep this opening. I think I'm really liking this. I don't know, people here listening to us, if any, would believe us. This is really went, and we just decided to trust the process, trust each other, and see where would it take us. And I think the next episode to talk about strategies as maps would be absolutely a delight. Robert, thank you very
I'm,
much.
I'm just I'm just going to place on record that if the Heriot Watt strategy 2030 or 2035 has a visual image of a group of university colleagues standing on a mountain looking at a map, I'll know where that came from.
Absolutely, and you would know you have inspired me and inspired so many of us at Harriet Watt, both staff and students, that the stuff that you learned from you is immense. And for me, I've learned even in this session so much from you. So thank you very much, Robert.
So
And I
there's
look
there's there's that question again, Mushtaq. In a different conversation, I'm going to ask you what it is that you've learned.
No, I've actually just now when you've told me, I was in this room telling people that I'm feeling so insecure about my job, and the people who were in the room, they were our colleagues that we worked with. But actually, it's a very powerful exercise. If before I did that, I put mentally myself with them and see that happening, and then I would have known, yeah, that's the right thing to do. That's a sort of the ultimate authentic opening. And these people, because I know them and they are professional, they will see that as a good thing. So this is one of the things that I've learned. Of course, you inspired the idea of the multiple layers, because we talked about that, I think, in our first episode, because you said you are a framer, and I saw you as a framer. The other thing that one day hopefully we'll talk about, because these are things that ideas for future conversation, you would always have a book like this. It's always black, and then when I sneak into what you're writing, you write in a very small handwriting, and you are telling me that you are studying whatever that's happening in the meeting, the dynamics, the things that people said. And maybe one day I would see whether I made it to that book and what was said in that book, because it's really very, very intriguing. And you tell me every time we meet, say, okay, I'm in my third book this month, or this week I finished a book, because there were so many things that I was doing. So these are all very, very inspiring things that I've learned, and also stories that I could convey to other people. So I'm ready to answer the question. I'm not just speaking in the sort of fluffy kind of space. It's very concrete, the stuff that I've learned from you.
Great conversation, Mushtaq. Look forward to our next one.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I look forward to our next conversation.